if one is looking at large-scale nuclear and conventional power, I think banks very much are looking at the credibility of the ability of the project to commit its repayment. That sounds obvious. When you get to the scale of very large projects, however, the political agenda is extremely important. To have a very clear commitment from governments and regional authorities to stand behind the projects to ensure that the power that is generated by those projects will be used and therefore provide ultimately a commitment to repay, in my view, is absolutely critical if you want foreign investment outside of the region. It is the case in many local regions that local banks and regional banks can be persuaded, notwithstanding the political difficulties, to continue to provide finance, although I think this is becoming more limited. If one is looking to bring inward investment of scale and substance, then having some framework, whether it's a regulatory framework, legal framework, that is driven politically by a clear political vision that requires three things. There should be a need, and again that sounds obvious, but we saw in the 1990s in the deregulated markets in the United States too much capacity, and therefore there wasn't the need. So one's got to be very visionary. That's why I look to governments to set out a clear agenda as to what framework they want for energy, so we don't run into problems that we've seen before. There has to be willing, there must be willing public and private sector partners with mutually complementary interests. And finally, there has to be good value for money. If you don't have those three key elements, and I think most of those are driven by clear political leadership, then I think it is more difficult to attract external investment.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. I mean, that's a very useful comment coming from a large international private bank. Now we go to EIB, which I understand works slightly different. Of course, it has slightly different terms of references, and perhaps you could enlighten us on your approach.
Yes, I mean, the European Investment Bank, and I think I can talk to, on behalf also of the other IFIs, have an approach which concerns mainly a dialogue with the governments. So this dialogue is institutionalized. European Investment Bank high management have ongoing discussions with governments of the region to establish what are the national priorities in the various sectors, including the energy sector. This approach is developing through a number of years now, and basically the governments come up with their wish list in terms of projects to be financed. And those projects are likely to be put on the budget of the respective governments. And most of the time these projects are co-financed with EIB, EBRD, World Bank, and KfW. So it is let's say, a strategic dialogue. Sometimes we feel there is not enough coordination among all the stakeholders, as it becomes quite complicated. I mean, member states have available for candidate countries and member states significant funding. In the candidate countries, the governments and promoters can draw from IPA funds to be blended with IFI funding. And then each institution has a broad range of instruments. EIB has a number of them which can be tapped for preparation of projects through technical assistance, long-term lending for projects, advisory services. I mean, you get lost in all the acronyms at the end. And this is only from the EIB side. The EU, for instance, has more than 100 funding programs for all sectors, not just energy. So the key issue is coordination and make sure that the promoters know about this information, which is key to put in place for the funding of their projects. So, I mean, from my point of view, the mechanisms are in place. They are working reasonably well. So the key challenge is also the absorption capacity for such funding. As you know, some new member states in Southeast Europe have yet to come up to speed to absorb the structural funds that are on offer. So key here again is preparation. Preparation. I mean, for structural funds to be used in 10 years' time for Serbia when it becomes a member state, or hopefully shorter, they need to have the projects in place. Otherwise, this funding will disappear or go somewhere else.